What's up, everybody? I'm Nathan Graham Davis, and I'm going to re-break in as a Hollywood screenwriter. Hey everyone, it's week 11, and we are about to get into an awesome interview with Dan Kunka. He's going to go over pitching and how he approaches the first half of Act 2, things that he likes to leave out of a script, and a whole lot on the movie that he's currently working on with director Philip Noyce. Before we get into those things, I just got a quick favor to ask you. If you're getting any value out of these at all, please subscribe and please share an episode with a friend. My goal is to finish this whole series with a live streamed reading of the finished, polished script, and I can't do that unless there are 1,000 of you subscribing. So thank you so much in advance for helping to make that happen. This week, I'm not going to do any screen capture of my writing. I've been doing a ton of work as far as just my writing and this series and my day job goes, and seeing as it's Thanksgiving week, I just want to scale back a little bit and put some time into my family. So thanks for understanding that. But you are going to love this interview. Just a bit of context, the script that Dan is talking about is called Church of Spies, and it is based on a true story about German defectors who teamed up with the Pope for a series of assassination attempts on Hitler. And it's awesome. So here we go.
Hello.
Hey, what's up, man? How are you?
I'm good. Hold on, let me
There you are.
get my video going.
How's it going, dude?
Oh, it's good. How are you, man?
Doing all right. So, hey, thanks for carving out some time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited. Trust me, there's nothing I love talking more about than this job. So it's easy.
Well, then that's awesome because I've got a lot of questions for you. So, dude, Church of Spies was so good.
Thank you. You're like one of the only people who's read that draft outside of the people who are involved in it.
Well, thank you for sharing it then. I was actually going to ask, how long you've spent writing that and how many drafts there are, because I know it's based on a book, right? But it's not a novel.
It's based on like a historical book. Sorry, hold on, let me just get this up. And then I've been doing it for a while. I was hired to adapt it almost like 5 years ago maybe. And I did like a first draft. That was not as good as what you've read. And then, so like I did 1 or 2 drafts there. Then it kind of fell in because we had there was like a very large, important director who was interested in it, but we could never kind of tie them down. And that wasted like a good 2 years of just sort of waiting and seeing and thinking. Sure. And maybe you're going to meet them and maybe you're not, and all this stuff. And then that sort of all fell apart. And then with it, everyone just sort of let it kind of die. And then it's just a small company that it's at that owns the rights to it and that paid me. And then they were like, hey, they started showing it around and they got Philip Noyce, the director, attached. And
who's perfect for it, by the way.
Yeah. Like, and I met with him. I met with him just to be like almost a year ago, right? So like end of last year we met, and he was just sort of like, he was very like big picture, still kind of coming in, had a lot of thoughts, but wasn't really structured. And then we kind of met and talked a little bit, and then the pandemic happened, and literally he was shooting a pilot that got shut down, and he called me up, and he lives in Santa Monica, and he called me up and he was like, all right, I'm going to call you every day at noon and we're just going to go through this thing. And I was like, oh yeah, sure, whatever. And then he like called me like 4 straight weeks. And we just like talked it all out and restructured some things. And like he really was the one who sort of, like you mentioned the character stuff, he was the one who really busted my balls about that.
Dude, it's so good though. Like the character stuff, it's absolutely, if somebody wanted to read a script to, understand what subtext is all about, like this is that script. Like it's just,
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's good. But it was, so I did like a draft, and then we did several iterations of notes. And then, it was great because it was literally, we had nothing else to do. We had lockdown. He was it was good because I think it's rare that you get directors, and especially directors like him, who are working and doing a lot of stuff where he literally had nothing else to do. So we would just, and he's been around, and he's Philip Noyce and I'm me. So he was not afraid to just be like, hey, this is not good. Let's just think better here. And he would just keep pushing me. And his big thing was like, it was such a big, was complicated and complex. And he would just keep hammering me until finally I'd be like, listen, you don't get it. It's just the story is A, B, and C. And he'd be like, okay, just do that. And I'd be like, fine, you're totally right. And so, anyway, I'm glad you're right. So we're casting. They're casting now, and I don't really. They don't keep me in the loop on things, but I have high hopes for it, and I'm proud of how it turned out.
Yeah, I mean, you should be. So how different is this draft from what you had before he came on board?
I would say this. I would say if you like, and this is going to sound weird, like if you saw two pictures of the screenplays, you would know that they were the same thing. Like it would be seeing like the interior of a house before and after, like a remodel, but you can still tell it's the same house, and it's the same bones and even the same color pattern, but like it's just all been rejudged and like focused into something, which is just a lot of like losing. I had a lot of decoration over here that was just extraneous plot, extraneous, and again, because he's made a million movies, like, he would just be like, well, we don't need that. And I'll be like, well, we kind of need that. And he'd just be like, no, you just show this and you show this and they'll figure it out. And you're just like, and then you write it and you're like, oh, everybody figures that out. Nobody cares about minor characters or how they get from X, Y, Z, like, and that's how it is. So it's like, I wouldn't say that the drafts are, they're different and a lot has changed, but it's still sort of all the same thing that I've been working on sort of the whole time, which is nice. I think that he came in and was able to see what I was trying to do. And a lot of it was just him being like, well, here's how you can do your job better. And so then I kind of followed on.
I mean, it sounds like it was a pretty good experience overall.
Like I said, we're proud of it. And it was a very, very eye-opening experience. Just, when you work with someone who knows what they're doing and is able to just sort of like, it's always learning. It's just learning. The more you write, the more you learn. The more you do it, the more you learn. The more someone who knows what they're doing tells you what to do. And then you actually, I think it's one thing to hear people talk about movies and be like, this is why we did X, Y, and Z. It's another to like actually sort of be in that process and have them be like, hey, X, Y, and Z. And then you do X, Y, and Z. And then you're like, oh, like, it's like trying to teach someone how to throw a curveball. Like, I can tell you how to throw a curveball and you can be like, oh, I get it. But until you actually throw the curveball, your brain's not like putting it all together.
Well, dude, I mean, honestly, like this has been really cool to hear because and I don't mean again to be all like gushy about your script, but like, it's just like reading that one. It's the type of thing like, I would love to aspire to be at that level. Right. And so to hear you talking about, how you're still learning and how this was a learning process for you is very cool. It's nice to know that never stops, so
it's like, I think that I've made the most progress in my actual screenwriting in the last, I would say like 2-3 years, like even with other projects that I've been working on, just, and I think a lot of it is, finding like those emotional character things that work, and just really, I know for me, like I think we all have crutches, and I think for me, doing what I was doing, like I think it was always just like a little too plotty, a little too focusing on shoe leather, like feeling the need to explain how a character got from Chicago to Boston, when if you show them in Boston, everyone knows they just flew on a fucking plane. Like nobody cares. Like, right? Like it's sort of a
right.
Again, it's the difference I think between like when you're a director you're not concerned with that because you're visualing and you've done all this, and I think when you write, you sort of have a tendency to, because you're not, even though you're writing visually and you're telling, you're saying a guy is walking down a Boston street, right? Like there's not that visual connection of seeing it when the person is reading it. So I think that you intuitively oversell it. Like I also think like with young writers, the first, scene description, flowery language, right? You over describe because you're like, you know what? You're excited because you have it. So you're like, oh my God, I've got this great action scene where these guys are going to fight. And like, I've got every beat and it's going to be better than, whatever. And you painstakingly like write all that out and use a lot of adverbs and adjectives because you're going to like paint this picture for the person when, it's not as bleak as this, but if you're just like, hey, they fight and he wins, like sometimes that's better. Like, and a lot of the times that's better. Like the description and just, it's just it's all things that you can only do. I feel like once you've done them wrong, then you sort of evolve and figure out hopefully how to do them right.
Dude, it's funny you say that because I just got to my midpoint today. And there's a physical fight at that point, and I wrote it, and I thought it was going to be a page and a half long, and then I realized I only needed like 5 action lines to do it. And it's been a few years since I've written a screenplay. This one is much less action packed than anything I've written in the last few years, or the last few scripts. And those other scripts that I'd written, I definitely focused a lot more on all of the interplay there between the characters and fight scenes and things like that. And that was actually something that I just noticed today and realized I didn't need all of that. So it was kind of cool.
Yeah. I think you want to do like, it's more important to be, I think if you're doing like an action heavy script, it's, when he kills the guy, and if that's cool, you take a beat there. And like, I think that's, when it's the start of the fight and they exchange punches, you just literally write they exchange punches and then you move to the end, right? Like I think everybody gets, the only thing that's really important is finding whatever the memorable moment is. And most of the time,
you have to make the character moments count.
Yeah. So. Like, yeah. If there's a character beat, if there's like, well, this is the guy we're going to kill in this way and it's cool, we make sure that that's highlighted, figured out, whatever, if you can make it be a callback to something, that's always great. Sure. Like it's, it's the old adage, right? Like and again, every time I turn in a script to anyone, it's always like, can it be 5 pages shorter? And for whatever, 15 years, you say, no, it can't be. And then you've just basically anytime anyone says, can it be 5 pages shorter? And it's almost always yes. Like there's always stuff to lose. There's always stuff to condense, and almost, again, not always, but I would say almost always, making it shorter makes it better. Like it's just, writers hate to hear it, and it can be reductive and it's not always right, but basically, again, and it's more, I always take it as, don't make it shorter by chopping parts of your story. I say make it shorter by, let's make sure this scene work is as economical as possible. Right? Let's just make sure what I'm writing is the bare minimum, most evocative version of that scene. So it's like, what are the few action lines that set the scene? What are the best lines of dialogue? What's the latest we can get in, and what's the earliest we can get out, and keep this puppy moving. And I think that's a big thing to look at, when you get to the end. But it's also, I think it helps when you're actually writing the story, because it just kind of keeps you moving on to the next thing. Yeah. Like you said, if you're going to take a day and a half, if you take a day to write a 3-page action sequence, and if you could have been done with it in 45 minutes, it's almost better to just always keep moving and keeping your momentum going forward. I have more than once, I will usually it's my manager who gives me the first like lose 5 pages, and I'll be super diligent of losing 5 pages. And like I said, most of the time it's not, occasionally you'll lose a scene, but usually it's just like trimming here and there. And then you end up trimming a line or two or a moment that then when you go back and read it, you're like, oh, I got to put that back in. Like because then you've lost the 5 pages, then you're reading it. Then then they send you back because there's like one other thing to do. And when you're doing that one other thing, then you kind of go back and you like refluff up, where those little things that you may have cut unnecessarily. I don't know, page counts. It's very.
Well, yeah, you wrote Yellowstone Falls, which is like the prime example of page count, and
45 pages there, 48 pages.
Yeah, and that ended up being a pretty good sale, if I remember right. So
yes, it was. It was great. We've almost made that movie almost too many times to count, but it's been 3. I have 3 like where I had someone say the other day, an executive from Lionsgate, who's now somewhere else. We were doing like on a general Zoom, and he says, "Oh, Yellowstone Falls was the closest script to a green light that we didn't end up greenlighting." And I was like, "Well, that's
like that. Why would he even tell you that?"
He wasn't being malicious, but it was just
of course.
I knew it was close. So you're just like, damn it.
Is there still any chance for it, do you think, or is it dead?
I always think it's dead, and then you never know. It kind of comes around. It's so unique and so different. We're never going to run into someone else made your live action nature movie where wolves are running from zombies in Yellowstone Park. Like I don't think anyone's ever going to.
You say that now.
Yeah, right. I hopefully dual development doesn't kill it. I have hopes. Hopefully it just gets cheaper. The cheaper it gets to do CG animals, the better. Because I think that was always our stumbling block, was always too expensive to do it in CG. And even though we had Louis Leterrier was attached to direct, I mean, he still is attached to direct, was content on like raising live wolf pups and going out and doing it for real. And as amazing as that would be, I think that people were just skeptical of that. So it's right in it's a very tough one. It's very close to my heart, and I hope the best for it. But
yeah, man, me too. I mean, just because like to me, I still think you were crazy for writing that in the first place. But obviously, like it worked out as far as the sale goes. And
this is a 100% true story. Met with the producer. He sort of had the initial idea. We worked it up. I started like, I was like, nope, this is bad. I'm not going to do this. And then I kept thinking of it and it sort of started developing, and I was like there, and I was in the car with my wife, and we were stopped at a stoplight. And I said, I think I'm going to write this wolf zombie movie. And I remember exactly where we are. I know what street we were on. I know what light we were on. She just turned to me and she goes, just don't spend too much time on it. And I said, you know what? That's great advice. And so like, I think I wrote that first draft. I mean, like I said, it was only 40 something pages. I think I wrote that first draft in 5 or 6 days. And then, a couple of, many revisions through there, but the bulk of the work was really quick. And then once we got that first, I think once that first set and people could sit and read it and they were just like, oh, I get what this is, and this is a thing, then it became, then we took a little more time with it. But that sort of initial proof of concept was as my wife said, don't waste much time on it.
I never asked you this. Like, how did you know it was long enough at 48 pages? Like,
so
that's an interesting just gut instinct to know that it.
So there are a couple of threads. So one was, there had famously been a couple of because there's very little human dialogue, right? Right. And there had been a couple of no dialogue scripts that had been around town. There was one that the Coen brothers were going to do with Brad Pitt called Into the White. And Brad Pitt was like a soldier in World War II in the Pacific. And he gets down in Japan and he has to like survive in the wilderness and like make his way back to base. And it was like 98 pages, no dialogue, but like all action. And it was 98 pages. And there was another one called, I think it's either called Motor City. I think it's called Motor City. And it's by a guy, Gary St. John. Oh, fuck. Gary
I've read this.
But it was the same way where there was no dialogue, right?
I remember when that came out because that was the first one I'd ever heard of, like as far as like hot specs went, with no dialogue in them.
With no dialogue, and it was great, but it was also like 85, 90 pages. And you would, when I read those scripts, you would read them and you would feel it because you're not doing dialogue. And when you're reading not dialogue, it takes longer. So I was like, oh, instead of me reading the script in 50 minutes, I was reading the script in an hour and a half, 2 hours. And that's long, right? So then I was like, if we're going to make this, if the only way people are going to consider a movie with wolves and zombies are in it, they have to get to the end, because the end makes it, right? The end, when the mother wolf stands on top of the mountain and howls and everybody howls after him, and like the little pups have their moment, and Runt, the pup who couldn't jump across the thing, jumps across the thing at the end to save the day. Like all those emotions, all that feel like you know what this movie is, you had to get to there, right? So I was like, I don't want to write it 90 pages because people won't get there in one sitting. People will read it, get to page 45, have 45 more pages, and not quite get it. And then they start to think, why am I reading 90 pages of no dialogues with wolves in it, right? When it was 45 pages, I literally told my reps, I was like, this is how I say, you send it to them, don't tell anybody what it's about, and just be like, it's 45 pages, you're going to read the whole thing, and just read it. And the idea was they would get to the end, and when they got to the end, and those beats that I was pretty confident were going to landed, they came out of that with like, oh my God, this is a movie. I see this, right? Like it was short enough where they could do it all in one sitting, and they could get to the end before they started to think, why am I reading this wolf versus zombie script, right? Because they got to page 20 and they're like, why am I reading this? This is crazy. And they're like, well, I've only got 25 more pages to go. I'll get to the end, and then we'll talk about, do I want to make this movie or whatever it is. So it being short, I think, was instrumental in its selling, because we needed to get people to get to the end to see that the story worked. And I will also say just from, I don't know when we numbered the scenes, like it was about the right amount of scenes. I think that like when no one has ever, and I think it went like, once we started doing like production drafts, and we did all sorts of crazy things to try to get it to work, but we basically went back, like the version that was closest now is very, 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 very similar to what we started with in that original spec draft. Like change some of the character stuff of the few human characters, but like all the scenes are basically the same. And I would say that, you know, no one's ever doubted that it was going to be long enough. I think that everyone just, it felt like there was enough story for a 90-minute movie, and that's always just sort of been there.
That's really cool. I'm glad I asked that question.
Yeah, it was, awesome. But it was, like I said, it was very much strategic. And I was like, we're going to write this. Oh, and the other thing was, I wrote it in like November. We finished it over the holidays, then went out with it early in the year. But that screener season, the Robert Redford movie with no dialogue, All Is Lost, came out, and they sent.
I don't even remember that movie.
Yeah, it's by J.C. Chandler it was Robert Redford was on a boat by himself the whole time. I think it's Robert Redford.
It's worth checking out.
Oh yeah, it's great. But
really, okay,
that helped us out because that script had no dialogue, and they sent the script around for the WGA award. So everybody in the WGA got like a bound copy of it, and it was only 32 pages. And I was like, if they did it in 32 pages and it made a 90-minute movie, we kind of had a built-in proof of concept there that was going to help us out. So
that's
I think
awesome.
I think I'm pretty sure I knew that before I started writing, that it was that short, but like all that thrown in, seeing how a short script made a 90-minute movie, and then just knowing that the idea was, let's get to the end of this to try and sell it, all sort of worked in conjunction with each other.
That's awesome. I love that. I had no idea that there was that much strategy behind it. So that's pretty cool. So, so dude, I'm wondering if I can get some thoughts from you on like the first half of Act 2.
Yeah.
So I just got to the midpoint of my script, and I like a good chunk of Act 2, but there's like this 15-page sequence or whatever in the middle of that first half Act 2, which honestly, like, I think I'm gonna have to trash most of it, which, is not surprising for a first draft, but it just kind of feels like I'm hitting the same notes a lot and repeating the same ideas, and it's kind of boring. So I'd be interested to know, because like I know this is something that you're good at, building like rising action and tension. I'd be interested to get some of your thoughts on that.
Well, all right. So here's what I've kind of come to realize, is that when you get second acts are hard. They're just always hard.
I actually think this is the hardest part of the script, the first half Act 2, at least for me. Like the first half, the hardest part of the first draft is that.
It is, because you need to sort of, you sort of have started your story, but you can't burn through everything to get to sort of like, once you hit page 60, then you can kind of like, all right, well, we're down, as I always say, and it's once you hit page 60, it's like downhill swimming, right? Like you're just, you're going and the story's going and you're following it down there. So what has really helped me figure out, so again, we're talking page, 28 to 60. And what really has sort of helped me is something that I do when I pitch now, which is, you usually pitch a fairly intricate first act, right? You talk about the story and the characters, but usually at some point in the pitch, in the beginning, you're like, and as we come to at the end of Act 1, our hero or whoever makes this decision, and we're off into Act 2. Like every pitch I've ever had in my entire life has contained the phrase, and we're off into Act 2, right? Because usually during this pitch, and usually when you're writing, you've mapped out that first act, right? Like, where we start, we know, right? Everything is boom, 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 and we get to this point. And this point is like the jump off. We're going off the cliff. Here we go. And we're off in Act 2. And then it's like, okay, well, what do we do now? And so what I've started to build into pitches, which I think also then helps is the writing, is I start to think of, because again, when I was younger and I would pitch executives, I had a tendency to overpitch, and I would overpitch because I would meticulously plot out the entire movie, and I would pitch like every beat up the stream, right? Everything. And it was just long and it was boring. And what I realized is that if your first act is good, and once you're into the story, when I'm just like telling you what happens, we only care about a few other beats and twists. And so it became this thing where I would build to, okay, so we're off into the second act. Okay. And so we're going to reset. We're in the second act. We've got our hero going for the goal. We've got our bad guys trying to stop them. We've got all this, we've got these couple of threads, right? Because you've always got threads in your second act. You've got the A story, the B story, the C story. You've got him like at work. You've got him trying to figure out who murdered who. You've got these stuffs all sort of juggled in. And I would just sort of say, just like this, I would say, you've got the good guys after his goal. The bad guys are right on their tail, and they're tracking him down because of this. And there's, his brothers also got cancer, so he's got to figure out how to get the money. And it all sort of builds up, and then they all figure out that they need to meet in Texas, and they all go there. And then I say, on page 45, this happens, right? So my page 45 beat is just another version of my end of Act 1 beat, right? I've had an end of Act 1 beat, and we're off in Act 2. Well, on page 45, you're building to an event. And so he figures out on page 45 that his brother is really his dad, right? And you're like, whoa. And that's page 45. And maybe it's not that big. That's more of a page 60. Page 45 is he figures out the money is buried in his parents' backyard, right? Or whatever it is. But you've basically talked very general about these plot lines that you know are happening, but you've gotten to a very specific page 45 point. On page 45, they catch up to him and they have a car chase. He figures out his wife's been murdered, whatever it is. Page 45, boom, right? And that's it's not usually a choice moment, right? It's not usually your page 45 moment isn't your main character saying, oh, I'm going to make a choice and move this somewhere else. It's usually an information beat or an action beat or something that moves the plot along, right? So if it's
do you mean something that happens to them versus something that's proactive, or?
No, I mean, I think they can be proactive, but the outcome of it is more, the outcome of your page 45 beat usually is more plot. We have to break into the CIA. We have to, it's basically new complication to what we were goal. It's basically a complication and it redirects our drive. So we've got to break in somewhere else. This guy who I thought was helping me out is not helping me out. It's basically a complication. So, and it works out nicely. Again, you're basically telling like little 3-act stories all through your second act. So, excuse me, you're coming out of page 30. Nothing can stop me now. I'm the hero of this movie. I'm going to solve this crime. Page 45, I interact with the bad guy and, he breaks my legs and I can't run after him anymore. Oh shit. That interaction, conflict, something's fucked me up. And so then how do I react off of that, right? Which then builds again. So then it's like, oh, we've got to page 45, something very specific has happened. It changes us, it pushes us, it directs us in a different way. It shouldn't be, like you said, if it feels repetitive, you're not moving this, right? Like there's an escalation. Page 45 is like a pillar. And it's 30's here and 45's there, and you're going this way. Right. So you get to 45 and you got to keep going. So 45 launches you in, and then 45 launches you to page 60 or the midpoint, which I think is a really important, it's a really important part of the script, but it's also really important for the listener if you're doing a pitch, right? So you say, okay, 45, there was a complication. We learned more information, something that's going to like change our trajectory, but our guy's going to pound through it. And all of these other threads build until we get to page 60. And oh my God, when you get to page 60 is when something big has to happen in your movie, right? You're talking, again,
absolutely
huge action set pieces happen on page 60. Big mid-course reveals or changing directions happen on page 60.
Yep. So I just wrote that today. It's on page 55, but I think that's fine because it's a contained movie. So it's probably going to be on the shorter end of the spectrum.
Yeah, it's exactly what you want.
But I think it's the most fucked up thing I've ever written in my life. So it serves that purpose. So
yeah, people love that. It's like page 60 is really important. So, so again, when you're pitching or when you're outlining and when you're planning out your act 2, I think it's really important to say, here's my end of act 1, here's my 45, here's my 60. And if you've got those, then your brain, then you're just figuring out the best way to get from A to B to C, right? And that's how you write that. That's how you write that early second act, which is, I know these two things are coming up after I leave page 30. What do I need to tell to economically get to those beats the best, And again, it's being economical. It's, making sure we're focusing on character as well as action, doing all those things, making sure, our side character, our antagonist have time to develop, or just coming up with little plot things that sort of move everything around. but you're basically then just trying to come up with the best connective tissue from 30 to 45 to 60. And that's really how I like to approach that sort of part of the script, which I think is exciting, because usually you have not done the work usually to have that all plotted out very specifically.
Yeah, so it's funny that you say that, because so I did a outline that was fairly meticulous, for me anyway. Like 7 single spaced pages, which was plenty, except for this one area that I'm talking about. There was kind of a paragraph covering that whole thing, and it was like, this and this and this is going to happen, and but I'm liking this page 45 beat idea. I've never really operated with that, and didn't necessarily need to in the past, I guess, but I think I do need something like that for this script, so I need to go back and find it.
And like, again, I just use page 45 because I think everyone's
no, I get what you're saying, though.
You're basically looking for, like I said, that moment that props up the line between the end of the first act and your page 60. So, and again, like it's possible that if you have a great beat at 30, 45, and 60, when you get done setting all that up, fleshing it out, writing those scenes in itself, you're not looking at that much, you don't really have that much more to do.
Because almost all the tension is built into the movie now, and now you just got to kind of let it follow its course.
Right.
So.
And that's when you find, like, again, that's when you're finding your other, you can sort of say, that that's sort of, surface plot, right, moving the story along, but you can also, like, then you're tying it into the character arc, and you're tying it into, okay, well, how's, I know now X, Y, and Z are going to happen to get to these points. How does my main character feel about X, Y, and Z? And then where can I sort of put those things in? And it's like, oh, I also know that the brother who's a psychic needs to come back in the third act, and I haven't seen him for 40 pages. Maybe I throw him in here so that we can, so we can sort of do some stuff. And, a lot of that stuff is more, sort of fill as you go. But if you can sort of figure out those other beats and connect them, I think you start to really flesh out. And if you write it well and have all this other stuff going, is, maybe 60 happens on 55, or maybe it happens on 50.
Yeah, I mean, the page number isn't necessarily important, but I get what you're saying, and it's that uphill trajectory that it needs, for sure. And I think I've got a really strong beat, moving things from Act 1 to Act 2. I like that a lot. I think it plays well, and I really like this midpoint. But and some of the stuff in the first half of Act 2 is working, but it needs something to prop it up. So I think that's useful. And I can do some thinking on that, for sure. How long did it take you to figure all that out for Church of Spies? Because it's so complex and layered. Like, you have so many fucking moving pieces in that thing.
It actually, it's funny is that the to 45, and I have it on my computer right now, and I think the Mueller gets recruited into his mission and sort of says yes a little bit late. It's like page 31. It might be page 30.
Yeah, I was noticing that, and I was like, this does feel like, we're going into Act 2 now. It's a little late, but I mean, it's a slow burn movie, right? So I think it works fine. There were versions of this where it happened a little bit earlier, because I told the story from another I added the point of view of the Nazis who recruit him. So it was like, I was sort of explaining to the audience a little bit that got us to that moment of him saying yes was on page like 26. But we decided that it was better if he comes in cold and doesn't know why he's being asked to this meeting and all this sort of stuff, to then it makes it a little bit later, but I think it's like more touchy. But anyway, it's basically page 30. Then he has to recruit the Pope. So that's like another big goal. And that basically got us to 42, I think. Okay.
So then, I'm on a mission. I'm going to assassinate Hitler. I'm going to recruit the Pope to help me. Boom. That's really great. Then, there was a lot, and we kind of switched stuff around, but you just, I knew where we were going to then where basically we're at the point where you start a mission and you're trying to hide yourself. And then, as always, the bad guys get onto you. And that's kind of around where our page 60 was. So I just had to sort of, and it did go through, I wouldn't say that the plot changed. I would just say I wrote it not great, and then I had to go back and write it just sort of better. It was one of those things where, and again, with history and like people talking about stuff, you can get into the crutch of just, let me just explain why this is thing. But it's like, well, no, let's experience it. And so to experience it, you have to, you got to figure out how to make that emotional and stuff for your main character and go. So it was, it was definitely work. I would say there the 30, 45, and 60 were set and really haven't moved much at all. But just those interconnecting scenes of how we got to each have definitely gone through, several different versions.
Yeah. You're speaking about how page 31 was where it went into Act 2. And that was exactly what I saw for sure. But it worked really well because from, I think, about page 22 on, you had incredibly tense scenes leading up to that, so yeah, it felt like even though it wasn't, Mueller's decision, there was plenty to keep the audience in the seat,
right. The story was moving. And again, it was again, a little bit of a cheat because we kind of have two co-leads. And so in a story where there's two leads that then come together, you can use one to help the other one, even though they're not working together, right? Like, so the Pope makes some decisions early in Act 1 that's like, well, I'm going to use my Church of Spies to combat against Hitler. So you sort of, that's, like around page 20, you're getting those decisions, and then you're moving with Mueller and he's involved in something tense. So even though Mueller has not sort of classically made that Act 1 decision until 31, we're still we're kind of going forward. Same thing happens with, and again, it's tough for, people who don't know the story, but at the end, Mueller, who's this main character, goes to prison and sits around. It doesn't do anything for quite a bit, right? And so, again, that was even in like my initial pitch to write the thing. I said, well, at the end of the second act, he's going to get captured, but then we're going to bring in the Pope, who's going to have this sort of thing, and we're going to just kind of transfer point of view because we've seen these two guys interact and they're working sort of the same goal, and we'll just kind of follow him until we can bring everybody back in and sort of do this. So
did anybody question that? I'm curious, because
people were cool with it from the beginning. I don't know. They were just awesome. Like, oh, that sounds great, Dan. I think the fact that I was even thinking about it was like, oh, great. That sounds great. I don't know. Same thing with like having a year and a half time jump, in the middle of the script. And I was always like, it's not at the end of the act, but it's like kind of around page 70. We're going to like skip ahead, 16 months or 18 months. Everyone was just like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. It's like, well, it does. So we're just going to do it. And, it works. So
it
helpful.
Seems like it was kind of fortuitous that it took so long for this thing to come together, just because, so you were saying you started on this like 5 years ago.
Yeah, probably.
But then you said you've been doing your best writing in the last 2 to 3 years. So like, do you think you could have written it like this back then? Like,
no, probably not. Like, I think that you also just need time. Like they always say that's like, oh, the old, it's more of like a novel writing thing, or it was, the Stephen King on writing. It's always like, take your first draft and put it in a drawer for 6 months, right? But it's like, you never work that way, and you're always trying to get paid, and so you always move. But it's like, I read scripts now that I wrote, 5, 7, 10 years ago, right? And like, I always think that I always, for the most part, I always still love the thing that I loved that got me to write it in the first place, but there's just stuff you could do better. I mean,
Absolutely.
I know there's a few scripts in particular that I was like, if I could write that script now, I would fucking kill it. And I don't even know if it has anything to do with my skills as a writer. Almost, I think it does a little bit, but I also think it just means like I can see the sins I made then that I would just be able to correct now. And just having the time away from the material and from that like initial burst of creativity that got the material on the page, you can sort of see the error of your ways, which would hopefully help you out, making it better. But you're not always afforded that chance. This one I was. So it's
actually, it sounds like it was an incredible process kind of getting to work with Philip with all the time that you both had to devote to it as well, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and it was. And he was, again, when you're telling a big story with a lot of details, I think that there was definitely times where I thought I was being clear about things when I wasn't. And you just get into this, it's good to have someone there just to be like, I don't get it. And you're just like, well, and then you like talk it out. And like, there was a lot of like verbal communication of what was the story I was trying to tell. Right. And again, a complex true life story with a lot of true things that happened. But then of course I had to invent, the script is very truthful, but again, there's stuff that we have to condense, to invent, to sort of do. Right. And, it's just getting to that simple truth of like, I know at least 2 or 3 times it was just like, what is this again? And I would just say, it's X, Y, and Z, and we're following this guy, and it's just easy. This is it. And then he would just be like, okay, just write that and don't write all of this other extraneous stuff. And it was amazing how clearer the story became. And again, because I think that I know that I like to get sometimes involved too much in the intricacies and not a much, the emotional feeling and connection. So when you're worried too much about plot and the intricacies and being too clever, you're missing what people are going to respond to when they read or, see a script or see a movie.
Usually when my scripts have issues, it's exactly the same thing. Just getting really excited about something like that and losing a little bit of the character and losing track of the emotion or whatnot. And then you got to go back and kind of fight through that. So I certainly relate to that. But, that said, I think that aspect of you obviously lends itself well to writing a really complex story like this too. So, I mean, it's pretty cool, man. It makes me wonder, hearing kind of you talking about how you worked through this year, if we just have a shitload of good material around the corner because all anybody's been able to do is basically write and craft stuff.
I mean, I hope so. I sort of think that you get, having a sort of, good art comes from traumatic shared experiences. So I think there's going to be a lot of, I think there's going to be a lot of different, I think people are still writing and people are still buying things. So I think, the impetus is there to hopefully get in and do some interesting stuff. So
I'm glad to hear people are still buying because certainly I'm counting on that right now, putting everything I have into this shit.
Yeah, I don't think that part of the business has not really, I think it's maybe slowed a little bit, but I still think that's, if you write a great script, people are still going to want to buy it. So that's always the good part.
I certainly hope so. So, we'll see what happens with this one. I don't know how commercial it is because, I don't know if you've seen any of the stuff that I've been putting out, but it's a period piece, which kind of works against it. I think the idea is really cool and I'm writing it contained so that kind of offsets some of that expense, but
I've sold period pieces before. It's not always easy, but it's, again, it's not, with all these things, I think it's always like, it's good advice to listen to when then people say, oh, don't write a period thing. Don't write a romantic comedy. Don't write a straight comedy. Don't write a whatever, right? Like, I think that I think you should be aware that those obstacles present themselves, but almost every single time there's one of those sort of like industry-wide maxims about anything, someone sells a script about that, like,
Sure.
In the next year. So it's like everything is everything, and it's good to know the risks involved when you're doing stuff like that. But at the end of the day, shit like that sells. So you never know. Again, like, I think it's very like the questions about the second act and things like that. Like, it's a very the process is forever fascinating, and it's always tough. And I just I think it's just important to the more you do, the more you learn. And I think it's it's never. I would be hard pressed to find any writer who at any level who writes a script or makes a movie or does anything and comes away with it not having learned something from the process of doing it. So, that's always sort of it's the sort of thing that I always believe in. It's just like, you just gotta keep doing it. So.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's good to hear. And I certainly believe and hope that that's true, because I think it would be really boring to stop learning and feel like you couldn't get a whole lot better. So,
yeah. And I just don't think, that it's not like that. I don't think there's any kind of, it's not like, if you play a sport, there's, we all have our limits, right? You're a runner, right? You get to a point where you're not going to run any faster, and you're only sort of hoping to run this fast for as long as you can. And then you'll eventually start to get slower. And I think with
writing, I'm already getting there.
So. Yeah, the writing and creative endeavors, I think you can. It's limitless, because I think even when you start to even do it more, and you think you're to a place where it's like, I don't know how much more I can learn. Maybe that's when you start doing that's when you start doing crazy shit, and that's when you start like, well, I don't want to do anything like any of this shit that I've done before. I'm going to do something totally new, and that's the exciting stuff. That's when you get, that's when you can start really seeing some fun stuff.
Well, cool, dude. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
This is
all the
fantastic.
best to you and the fam in the middle of all this craziness, and hopefully talk to you sometime soon.
All right. Sounds good, buddy. Take care.
Have a great one.
Man, I cannot say enough about how helpful that was. I didn't go back and fix the pages that I mentioned to Dan, but he was able to help me course correct enough where I was able to confidently continue, and now I have a good idea about how I'm going to fix them later. I'm currently on page 70, which just feels awesome. I know that once I hit fade out, I'm still going to have a lot of work to do, but that is okay, because I'm moving forward quickly enough that I'll still have time to go back and do that, and then still get it out to that first round of readers and stay on track for this whole project. So feeling really good about that. Action steps for week 11 are simple, just like they have been for the last couple weeks. Read a script and write 20 to 25 pages of your first act. Stay on track. We are getting there. Just like every week, I'm giving away an autographed copy of Malice and Mistletoe, signed by myself and by Jack Purcell. If you want a shot at winning that, all you have to do is drop in the comments below something that you're really excited about having just written, whether that is like the perfect action line or character description, or maybe a beat that surprised you as you were writing it, a line of dialogue that you just think is awesome. Give yourself some kudos and let me know about it. For my part, like I just said to Dan, I think I just wrote the most fucked up thing that I've ever written. Not going to share that yet, though, because I do want that to be a surprise for the live streamed reading of the finished, polished script as the last episode of this series. So make sure to subscribe so you can help make that happen. Coming up next week is Malcolm Spellman coming back for round 2 to talk about the second half of Act 2. It's going to be awesome. Make sure to subscribe so you can see that. And as for week 11, that's it. Smash cut to black.